Hey, I'm Alan Furstenberg,
And I'm John G.
and welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
John, it is so amazing to have you on.
Thank you. I can't believe this is episode 210. That's wild.
It truly is wild. Mark and I have talked about getting you on the show now for at least 3 years. You have occupied this place in our planning spreadsheet that says John G question mark. We'll figure out what to talk about, but we want you on to talk about it.
That's
I
very kind.
It's always been great following what you've been doing and how you've been telling people about it and so forth. Um, and we'll get to this, but the reason we brought you on tonight was to talk about Apple Intelligence because you recently posted you were doing development in the Apple space and particularly focusing around what Apple is doing with Vision and Apple Intelligence.
Yep.
So I can't wait to get into that with you. But first, why don't you tell folks a bit about yourself, how you got here, where, how did you get into programming in general, and how did you get to working with Apple stuff specifically?
Yeah. Thanks, Alan. I I come from a media background initially,
Oh,
so
interesting. Okay.
I I worked in music and audio for quite some time, and then that led me to the YouTube world. And I worked with YouTube creators and YouTube content for about 5 years. And then as part of that, the end of that arc, um, I got laid off from the company that I was working at, the House of Mouse, uh,
Aha. Okay.
and so I had been grinding in the trenches of the YouTube world for a number of years, and that gave me a chance to sort of catch my breath and think about what I wanted to do next. And um, that was, that was around the time that Echo and Alexa was kind of on the up and up.
Hmm.
And
Before we get into that, though, I've got a question for you. So you say you were working with creators and working with YouTube. In what capacity were you working with? In doing music design and doing that sort of stuff, or was it more of a programming angle?
no, I wasn't. I was not doing tech at that point.
Okay.
Um, so it was a really interesting company called Maker Studios that was founded by one of the earliest sort of collectives of YouTube creators in the early days of YouTube, and they sort of banded together and realized that if they shared expertise and production resources as well as their audiences, that they could all grow together. And that turned into this crazy startup. I wasn't there at the beginning. I came in a few years after that, but it ended up at its peak. I think they looked after 50 or 60,000 YouTube channels,
Wow.
and Disney purchased the company, and there actually was an entire tech team that was like a startup within the startup, and I spent a lot of time hanging out with that crew because some of the creators I worked with had mobile apps at the time. And so that gave me a little kind of window into how a technology team actually worked. And so I sort of saw that more in hindsight, but I think that was sort of sending me on this path. I was doing more content as well as creator management,
Okay.
things like that.
So that brought you to the voice era, the Alexa assistant era. And how did
Hmm.
you get into that?
Well, so in a few days before my my Disney badge was, decommissioned, I went over to a technology demo day in the interactive division, and there was a bunch of really cool stuff that was sort of winking at the future we're living in now from Imagineering and Lucasfilm and some other divisions. And voice and conversation was a theme of that. And so it and there was actually Jeff B, the old Alexa evangelist. um, he gave a little talk that day. So it I sort of knew this Alexa thing was happening. I wasn't particularly interested in it, but that day really sort of recentered the technology around the creative potential, and that's sort of what gave me the push that sent me in this direction.
So you were inspired by what you saw. You were inspired by what you were seeing coming from this, from a content creator point of view, and kind of what did it push you to do?
I was really drawn to the fact that you could make sound and write words that came out of this thing. I didn't really think of it as software at that time. It was more
Huh.
like, oh wow, this is like, you can create characters, and it's interactive audio, and it's like that was really exciting to me.
Yes.
um and so i I rolled up my sleeves and was like, I'm going to build an Alexa skill. And back then it was uh quite a bit more primitive than it evolved to in the years after. But yeah, I was watching YouTube videos on JavaScript 101 and figuring out what a Lambda function was and how to get code into it. And I think I look back on that period very fondly, because it was one of those, like, those moments where, like, you don't know what you don't know. All I cared about
Yes.
was making stuff and iterating on it and putting stuff out there. And so I made like 10 skills or something within that first run of months. And not doing anything the right way, like, you know
But you don't know any better.
totally, like, live editing code in the Lambda editor. Like, I didn't even know how to use GitHub at that point, right? So I was flying by the seat of my pants, but learning a lot. And there was a good feedback loop from the community. um, and I the first time actually that I went to an in-person voice thing was when I met Mark. Up until that point, I had been just like in my apartment alone, like pushing a boulder up a hill, trying to trying to get like simple things to work. And after that, I was sort of saw the community, and some of the stuff I worked on got some love from some of the Amazon hackathons, and then that
So,
led to some work. The first project that sort of got some attention was called Chop Chop, and I worked on it with KDB, and she actually was at the same YouTube company, so we met there and both got laid off on the same day. We were excited about the screen devices in particular. We made Chop Chop for Echo Show in 2018, and uh, that got some hackathon love. And then I started getting work, and then that turned into like a 5-year arc.
one of the things that I think that brings out to me is just the power of community and support, and just diving into something totally new and just seeing what you can do with it, and doing amazing things. And that's one of the things that I love about programming in general,
Mm,
is that you can do amazing things with it. And sometimes it takes a lot of work to get there. But
mm,
once you've unlocked it, once you've figured it out, the sky's the limit.
totally. I think also at that time, you know, coming off of that experience of getting laid off, uh, there was a fire inside of, fine, like, I don't need you companies. I'll I'll figure out my own path. And so that definitely fueled me during that time as well.
So cool. Um, so you were a big name in the Alexa development community. You did some amazing stuff, um, which I would love to go into sometime, but we do want to keep it relatively short. We're not going to, but we want to keep it relatively short. Over time, kind of, you started fading away from it probably about the same time that everyone else started fading away from it, including Amazon. All of us ended up having to move away from this community that we had built, and we've all moved in different directions. How did you kind of move away from it?
I sort of had a dual path going where I was, part of the indie dev community and publishing stuff myself. But I was also doing consulting with media companies
Mm-hmm.
exploring voice technology. And so that was my main gigs during that time. And I think I started wanting Amazon devices around my house less and less, not from like a tinfoil hat privacy perspective, um, more from a kind of a crummy product experience perspective. There were these devices everywhere with screens, and like the stuff that was coming up on them just felt like sort of like, I don't want this in my house. I don't
It,
want to
it
look at that.
right. It's like you had this vision of what this was supposed to do, and you figured it would get there sooner or later, and it just kept feeling like it was getting worse, and it was getting later.
Yeah. So that was the first sort of crack, I guess, because I had that stuff around because I was genuinely excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and then I think I started to burn out on the client side of things. It felt disingenuous to be sort of consulting and evangelizing around something that I was losing the fire for, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, in the summer of 2022, actually, at WWDC, which is Apple's annual developer conference, which I've watched, for years just as an interested observer of techie stuff.
Uh-huh.
Um, but that was the year they introduced the App Intents framework, which we should talk more about. And that was a moment where I sort of saw a path in the Apple ecosystem to build things in a way that made sense to me and to contribute something. So, um, you know, 15, 16 years after apps came out, I was like, I'm gonna get into apps. That sounds like a good idea. That sort of kicked off a chain of events where within a few months I had sort of bowed out of the consulting I was doing at the time. At the time, I just felt like there was so much going on in my head around Alexa stuff, and there was so much to learn that I felt this. I felt this need to like. I didn't want to do like some of this and some of that. I wanted to like shake the etch a sketch of my brain
Mm.
and like push all of it aside.
You had started over once before, and you felt that the only way to do with this is to start over again.
Yeah, totally.
Mm.
And so that was a strange time. Katie and I moved to Seattle in 2021. Um, so finally moved to Amazon land right after it was less
And
interesting to me.
yeah.
Didn't quite get that timing right. I spent a number of months um, just consuming as much as I could. Part of that was, doing a deep dive into all of the frameworks and APIs that Apple offers around speech and natural language and audio, um, which, you know, on the audio side in particular, there's so much going on.
That's always the impression I got, is that there's a lot about audio. I mean, I'm not deeply enmeshed in the APIs, but that's always the impression I had. But not so much about speech itself. I mean, there's something. At
Mm-hmm.
least I assume there's something. I always had this speak command on my Mac, but it didn't seem like there was not nearly the same level as what we were seeing in Google and Alexa.
I think that's fair. on the surface for sure. And you know, thinking back to those years before that, it felt like kind of a trope in our kind of voice in indie voice bubble of, you know, every time WWDC came around, it was like, this will be the year that they
Yes,
do
yes.
something with Siri. No, this will be the year. And you know, years were going by, and I think just because they didn't come out with a one-to-one response to Alexa and Google of, you know, a standalone voice app, that kind of Apple as a player in all this was sort of, you know, dismissed by a lot of us.
So that kind of catches us up to all of the stuff. But what have you been doing lately? What are you up to these days?
Well, in order to actually learn all this stuff, I've been working on a bunch of different prototypes, but I've recently shipped my first app called Art Museum,
Congratulations,
which,
art museum. That sounds familiar.
yeah, totally. This is the third iteration of that concept. It's a little broader this time. It brings in artwork from multiple museums. So
Oh, cool.
it lets you browse art from the Met and the Art Institute of Chicago and the Cleveland Museum of Art. And those are all institutions that have leaned into open access data around their public domain collections. So I've used that as a foundation for this app, and it's shipping under the name Just by Speaking, which is sort of, you know, my north star as I'm making software for Apple. I'm really really wanting to, you know, explore all the nooks and crannies of language APIs anywhere I can. This app will continue to be a canvas for that as the Apple Intelligence stuff evolves.
We'll talk about Apple Intelligence in a couple of minutes, I'm sure.
For
So this app is meant for iOS. Is it Apple Vision?
It's iOS only right now. It
Okay.
actually is compatible with Apple Vision. I left that box ticked.
Okay.
But I'm really focused on iOS right now since I'm new, and I feel like I gotta eat my vegetables first and
You, you
learn
gotta
how
work.
to learn how to make a a proper iPhone app first
So
before I.
excellent. Okay, this is very exciting. So congratulations on your first app.
Yes,
Um,
thank you. Yeah, take a look. You can say, "Hey Siri, I need art."
that's great.
That's the sort
So
of the foundation utterance.
so maybe we should start getting into exactly where Siri and everybody, all of these guys fit into everything.
Totally. Apple bought Siri in 2010, I believe, and you know, we've heard pieces of that story from Adam Shire and some of the
Yeah.
Viv folks. You know, there's some good sort of stories about that era out there, but it wasn't until I think 2016 that Apple came out with SiriKit, which was their first first era of APIs related to Siri.
So I am surprised by this because I have never heard of SiriKit.
Totally. And you know, 2016, like I don't remember because it was a little before my time, but that's probably around when the Alexa SDK first shipped.
Oh, then yeah.
I think that's when all of that was ramping up. So, you know, Siri was around since the iPhone 4S, which is like really old now.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was a number of years, 4 or 5 years, where they were just investing in more first party functionality across different domains. You know, booking restaurants, ordering Ubers, buying movie
All,
tickets,
all of the
sports.
stuff that you talked to Adam Shire, and this is what his vision was this personal assistant that could do everything.
Totally. So 2016 comes along, um, and uh, that was the year of iOS 10, and iOS 18 just shipped. So, you know, 8 years ago, 8 cycles ago, um, SiriKit came out, and it was the first developer story around Siri. Um, it was quite narrow in the sense that it was bound to particular domains, um,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
there was a number of them, but you know, messaging and photos and calling and
I,
payments.
and I'm thinking of this, and it occurs to me that around the same, what was happening around the same time was you sort of saw on the social networking sphere the same sort of thing where they would, say, we're not going to give you unlimited API access to our social network, but if you're in these narrow categories, we've got this interface for you. We'll create this card with this prompt.
Hmm.
And if you have something else, talk to us and we'll think about it. And they would always think about it and never do anything.
Yeah.
Um, but it was very much the notion of you were designing something very narrow around very narrow verticals.
Yep. And so within those verticals, they even defined the sub intents that you could
Mm.
work with. So if you happen to have an app that aligned with that, there was some plumbing for you to explore. As that evolved, I think they added a few more domains over time, but not many. At some point, they came out with custom Siri intents, which is what it sounds. It gave developers the ability to define intents that fell outside of those domains. Um, but I don't think generally there was a lot of action around them. I never built with them. So, this is sort of me looking back and trying to understand how we got to now. So,
Uh huh.
caveat there. But um, I, I got the sense that the SiriKit stuff was quite brittle, and it required these configuration files where there was like a GUI in Xcode, and then you defined a bunch of stuff, and it spit out an XML, and it was finicky, and developers didn't like it. So now we get to 2022.
Okay.
Um, Custom intents have come out for SiriKit, didn't really work. Custom intents with Siri shortcuts then came out. That was sort of a thing, but it didn't. Where we sat in the voice world, these were not big swings compared to
No.
what Amazon and Google was doing. So App Intents comes along. I think at a highest level, it was positioned as App Intents takes what your app does and the content within it and makes it available outside of the walls of your app.
Huh. Okay.
For the longest time, using an app meant finding the icon on your home screen and tapping it,
Right.
and there was um, there was no ambiguity on what app you were using at that moment. What App Intents did was give developers a way to define their actions as well as their content types in a way where the system could understand what your app did and with what,
Uh huh.
and that enabled some different experiences across the system. Some are anchored in Siri, but there's other places as well. And what we've seen over the last few years is that App Intents is actually becoming a really key sort of foundational plumbing of the Apple ecosystem, and Apple is building more and more OS features that take advantage of that.
So just to make sure I'm kind of following this, so as part of app intents, you're defining an intent and you're saying here are the possible inputs that an intent will take and its parameters and its possible values, and here's what it will return, and you're registering this in some way. Did I summarize that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's a good framing of it.
So the really funny part about this, to me anyway, is that almost exactly describes what Bixby's pod system was, which of
Mm,
course was designed by Adam Chire.
totally.
So
Um,
once again, Adam Chire's concepts return to Siri.
yeah, I I tried, by the way, to as I'm sure you dabbled too, but when Bixby came on the scene and was sort of vying for developer support, like I I tried to sort of play in that sandbox, but like it didn't not click with me. Um,
The concept of it clicked pretty quickly with me. The way I was describing the difference between the different platforms at the time was along the lines of Alexa kind of tried to model the app world, and Google Assistant kind of tried to model the web world, and Bixby was trying to model the semantic web world, so
mm,
that each component had this metadata attached to it, and
hmm
these components were somehow linked together. And it wasn't; these were not perfect parallels, but that's kind of how I saw it. Is that Bixby wasn't trying to create an app;
mm,
it was trying to create a component.
mm, totally.
And it
And
sounds that's kind of what app intents are or
totally,
were.
I think the cycles of work that I had done with Alexa, I really sort of saw the I saw software through the lens of kind of modularity,
Yeah.
building on the intent side, but as well as the content side, like creating turns of conversation with modular pieces of text and audio and stitching all these
Yep.
things together and all
And
the different permutations of that.
right. And from that, it's really frustrating when you look at Bixby, at least on the surface, because you're like, well, how do I tell it what it's going to say?
Mm,
How do I design this conversation?
mm,
And I've been told that there were ways to do that, but on the surface, it wasn't obvious.
mm.
And we'll get to this, but this is now a recurring conversation that we have in the LLM world between the conversation designers and the LLM implementers about, well, okay, we have a conversation. How do I design that conversation? And we're wrestling with those questions again. Anyway, so continue. So we have these app intents.
One other detail kind of on the implementation side is that you define these intents in code now. Um, you write them in Swift. That skill up journey, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
like putting the intent stuff aside, you know, I learned JavaScript because I wanted to make Alexa skills.
Yep.
Um, and I think there was this growing pain where I sort of realized that like I really should be using TypeScript, but re refactoring all my old things from JavaScript to TypeScript, even though I intended to do that,
You never
every
get to,
time
yeah.
I never got to it. And so, Swift is a typed language. And I had to put a lot of things aside to sort of
You had to change your mental map. But at the same time, where I thought you were going to go was saying, you had a brand new set of projects. It was easy for you to kind of push out the old stuff that you had to think about and just start fresh with this new language, with this new environment, with this new world. It's a new way of thinking, but that's okay because everything else was new too. There wasn't a lot of baggage that you were carrying from your previous incarnation of
yeah,
what you had done, your previous programming life, so to speak.
yeah. And also from an architecture standpoint, you know, building on Alexa, building on Google Assistant, it was this constellation of web services that
Uh huh.
we as voice developers had to, design and implement and deploy and secure and all of the work and pain that comes with that. And it it sort of occurred to me that so much of that just exists in an iPhone now. Um, from a development perspective, like I didn't need lambdas, need uh, I didn't need a DynamoDB. Like I could actually use sort of primitives within the Apple SDKs to sort of um, offload all of that to them, which was another sort of different thing to get my head around.
So you've kind of given this idea of app intents being fairly pervasive. Just how much are they really doing all of these things in iOS? What do they do? I mean, yeah, what do they do?
So, you know, app intents are actions,
Okay.
and uh, app entities are things.
Okay.
Um, you can think of it as, app intents being verbs and app entities being nouns. Um, Now, app shortcuts combine those two things to create sentences. So, as a
Okay.
as a developer, you can define in Swift app shortcuts that are sort of known to the system as soon as an app is installed. They're a lot more limited than kind of what we've been used to on the Alexa side and Google side. For instance, you can only have one dynamic parameter, one slot in an app shortcut.
Uh huh.
Um,
But that's still.
so
I mean, that. I'll be honest. I think that's more than an app action can take.
mm, so they take zero then,
Yeah.
for sure. So app shortcuts are sort of the higher level way to enable Siri utterances related to your app. But by adopting app intents, you're also exposing your underlying primitives to the shortcuts app. So that means more advanced users can use your intents and your entities to, sort of build their own
Okay.
workflows and things. That gets into the automation kind of
Uh huh.
geekier side of things, which is still like a huge thing, but like for the average person, they're not probably setting up their own shortcuts. So one of the things that app intents did was, allow developers to pre-set up these app shortcuts that made it a little easier to, expose their stuff to Siri. So we get to 2024,
Okay.
earlier this summer, and you know the the
The world is talking about LLMs. We've moved. Everyone's moved on, and
totally.
everyone is wondering why Apple hasn't yet.
So at WWDC, they bring they bring us Apple Intelligence, which, to be clear, is a very large umbrella term. There is no one single thing that is Apple Intelligence. It is a branding umbrella for a lot of different things. Many of those things are just first party features that are coming to Apple platforms.
Okay. So
In
the stuff like spell check in Safari, or I think was one of them.
Yeah, there's a number of writing tools, text summarization and change of tone. There is some image generation stuff and Genmoji, and so there's sort of this smattering of first party features across iPhone, iPad, and Mac that are being branded as Apple Intelligence.
Okay.
And it's going to be a slow drip on some of those coming out.
And
The
that's normal. We're seeing the same sort of thing from Microsoft and Google. Is big visions, but you're slowly starting to see the co-pilots and the various things that are named Gemini coming out bit by bit.
Mhm.
So okay.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the for lack of a better term, those are the Apple Intelligence apps that are coming out.
Um, I would say I wouldn't call them apps. I'd say
Okay.
more system features,
Okay.
because the writing tools and the image playground, um, those are sort of first party feature modules that exist across Apple apps. So anywhere you can write, the writing tools would be accessible.
Okay. Fair enough.
And and there's APIs around that stuff if you happen to have an app that it makes sense to sort of fly in that system
Uh-huh.
UI around those features. But that's the extent of the developer story for that stuff.
Okay. So
Um,
that's kind of the rough equivalent of they're AI widgets in a way. In the same way we had GUI widgets that were defined by Apple. These are AI widgets that you can now include in your app.
yeah, I think that's
Maybe not a perfect analogy, but
I think that works. I We can roll with that.
okay.
Um, but the really interesting stuff around Apple Intelligence that's relevant to sort of this community as well as the app intents discussion is the enhancements they made to that framework. App intents is going to be the bridge between the new Siri and third party applications. There's a couple pieces of that story. Um, one of one of which is Siri being able to take actions across apps, and the other is what they're calling the personal context, or on the dev side they're calling it the semantic index. But that's basically an on device semantic data store that
Okay.
has understanding of context, deep context across all of your applications. And so part of the developer enhancements around app intents are around those two areas. Um, how do you, as a third party developer, expose your app's actions to this new system? And how do you expose your app's things to this semantic index? So there's a lot of pieces to what Apple Intelligence is, and it it can take a while to figure out what's relevant. Where the canvas is to take advantage of some of
Uh-huh.
this stuff. The new Siri, as it's being referred to, is powered by Apple Intelligence.
Okay.
And so what that means is there's an underlying foundation model, a large language model local on the device that is responsible for taking in natural language queries. The first sort of fork is this something that we think we can handle locally on the device, or is it something that has to be done server side? And that's a whole subplot of all of this. There's something they're calling private cloud compute, which is basically a full stack Apple, powered by Apple Silicon Macs, and they're running data centers that can, run bigger models for more advanced queries. But there's no, at this point in time, that's all first party stuff. There's no way a developer can take advantage of that.
Uh-huh.
It's my understanding, and there's not a lot of detail on how that decision is made. So
Okay.
the opportunity to be part of this is on the local side right now. If Apple Intelligence says, okay, we can handle this query on device, a couple things are going to happen. One is it's going to look in what they're calling the app intents toolbox, and
Okay.
and these are a bundle of intents that the system says, okay, across all the apps that are using this technology, here's all the different things they can do. Um, and a key nuance to that, which has been, I'm sure you've done whole episodes on this in the past, but putting on my Alexa hat for a second, it's sort of similar to the can fulfill intent stuff,
Mm-hmm.
or the name free invocation, where you know the the system is the one that's doing the disambiguation between those app intents to decide which app intent is going to fulfill the need of the query.
Uh-huh. Now, and again, app intents in this context at least, they are they're taking parameters which Siri will decide, I guess, and they're returning some value or set of values, right? Am I summarizing?
Yes, but yes, but is the is the theme
Is
here
the theme
maybe?
tonight? Well, this is me trying to mentally map what I understand to
Yeah.
what they're
So
doing. So,
another subplot to this.
oh,
Remember, SiriKit was based in these domains. Then
right, we're
along,
back to SiriKit. Oh
yeah,
no.
and App Intents comes along and says, forget domains. You can make an intent for anything your app does and expose it to the system and shortcuts and Siri. Great. The Apple intelligence layer on top of App Intents has brought us full circle back to domains.
Oh man.
So there are 12 new domains that are different from the SiriKit domains that are compatible with Apple Intelligence. And this is going to evolve, and more domains will come. And I'm sure this is just the start of the story. But for now, when this stuff first starts shipping, it's only going to be around these 12 new domains that Apple has defined, including what they're calling the shape of those domains. And that's a key point because app intents themselves are a blank canvas. You can
Yeah.
define any app intent you want and have it accept any number of parameters of any type. However, the LLM piece of this that's powering Apple Intelligence has only been trained in the 12 domains they've identified
That's where I was going with this. Yeah.
with the parameters that
Oh,
they've identified.
ouch.
And
Okay.
and all of these domains are one-to-one aligned with first-party system apps too, which is really interesting.
I wonder how they came up with it then.
Um,
So
and
that's really interesting. So all of that's interesting to me. In I kind of, two things about that jump out. One is that I was kind of about to make this comparison for people who are not familiar with what we had been doing in the past. That this seems a lot like what we are calling tools in the LLM world, where you can define a tool and you're defining the parameters for the tool, and you're kind of giving it a lot of text describing the tool and telling the list of tools that you have to the LLM. And it sounds like it's doing that sort of thing as well, but since the LLM is local and it's not so large, it has been carefully trained on just this subset of the world. So that's what it's able to take advantage of for some practical reasons, I can imagine. And that was kind of the other thing was, yeah, we're not dealing with a large language model sitting in the cloud. We're dealing with something that is local. So it's got a limited vocabulary.
mhm.
And with that limited vocabulary, that's why we have this limited number of domains.
Yes, and they're calling them adapters, which are actually on their kind of machine learning research site. They have a pretty nice overview of the architecture of Apple Intelligence that's worth looking at. But you know, basically, they've trained these adapters which layer on top of the foundation model for all of these different use
Uh
cases.
huh.
Um, and right now, those are only created by Apple. I think what we'll probably see over time is ways for apps to train their own
Mm.
adapter layer, but I don't really have a sense of scale for how much training has gone into each of those adapters because in the Google and Alexa land, like we were always used to providing training data that augmented
We were,
their language models. That
right.
was like how it worked.
We were
um,
providing our own Well, but the difference was we were providing very specific phrases, and it was using its models to kind of blend, fudge those phrases a bit.
Yes.
This is different. It sounds like we're not giving it phrases. We're just giving it the language. We're giving it we're what we would call tuning models, and we're seeing that tuning currently in just a few different small domains, and it will pick which tuning to apply for any particular input phrase.
Yeah. So to ground it in an example, photos is one of the domains. There's a number of intents within each of these domains that you can form your app intent to. So open photo album, for example, that's a really generic intent, but all of the all of the natural language around that is abstracted away from the developer. There's no utterance fine tuning there. You're just saying, that my app has photos and can open a photo album. And so your intent would exist in that toolbox. And then remember that semantic index, which is the other side of the coin, you're exposing the photo albums in your app as app entities, which are then indexed in the semantic index. And so that's where those two pieces are sort of fed back into the foundation model to do what it's going to do.
I want to make sure I follow two things specifically. One of which is kind of clear to me, is that you, as a developer, don't have access to the on-device model itself. It sounds
That
like
that's correct.
in no way, shape, or form. So even if you wanted to use it for something innovative, you don't have access to the on-device model.
Yep. So
Either through Siri or even outside of conversational stuff.
yes,
Okay.
there is a natural language framework
Okay.
that is available outside of the app intent stuff, and that's been around for years, and they've continued to add sort of new classes of models to that over the years. So I think the most the most recent iteration of that brought some of the BERT sentence embeddings um, as a native API for apps to be able to run
Mm-hmm.
jobs using building blocks of some of these things to do things in their app. So what I would assume is that maybe not next year, but over the next few years, I, I think there probably will be some aspects of that foundation model exposed to developers, perhaps through the natural language framework. But yeah, right now it's just you're throwing in your
Okay.
building blocks and it's doing what it's doing.
So there's no. I guess what I'm saying is there's no equivalent to Gemini Nano. If there is an on-device model, you don't have access to it.
Yes.
Okay. So
However,
okay,
there
but
yeah, yes, but um in parallel to all this, there's also the core ML framework, which is a
okay,
whole whole other topic. But you can bundle other models with your app and run inference locally if the
okay.
model is sort of
Okay. It,
at a size
yeah.
and shape that's practical. I've seen some apps that are experimenting with that currently. They'll have some feature that uses that, and it's like, do you want to download this model? And it's like a 5 GB model that gets downloaded or something in the
Okay.
background. And so there's plumbing there to be able to run your own lightweight inference locally. But I think there's a lot more complexity around that, and the what would be great is if the foundation language model that they fine tuned to really take advantage of these devices, if that was exposed, but it's not.
Interesting. Okay. So that's one. Two, though, is that the app intents are all predefined for you. You've got a finite set of app intents that you can implement. and the implementation's up to you for your app, but you have a list basically.
Well, this is where the branding of this gets a little confusing because it's only there's a subset of Apple intelligence compatible app intents that they're calling schemas.
Okay.
Those are predefined, and there's 12 domains and 100 or so intents across them,
Okay.
and that's going to be expanding over time, but
Right.
none of that has shipped yet.
Right. And okay, so A, it hasn't shipped. But B, that's what Siri is going to be using.
Well,
Question mark.
remember before we got into the Apple Intelligence stuff, see why it's taken me a while
Yeah.
to figure all this stuff out. It's like
And this is why I
makes
wanted somebody who was in the middle of this, not, me who
it.
might have read a web page on it.
So remember the app shortcut stuff we talked about before.
Yeah.
That was the initial piece of the app intents framework where you can define any intent you want with any input parameters you want and define any app entities you want and then package those together into app shortcuts. And that's the one place where you can, as a third party developer, provide natural language training data to the system. So, so,
Okay.
so app shortcuts, forgetting about Apple Intelligence, app shortcuts continue to be a feature that works.
And,
So you
and
could
this
have
is and this is not considered part of Apple Intelligence.
no. Yeah, it's pretty wild. And so if you have an app that happens to fall in one of the 12 Apple Intelligence domains, you can take advantage of those schemas that they've defined, but you can also have uh, custom app intents with your own shape that are leveraged by app shortcuts, and those can be used in parallel by Siri, you know,
Oh wow.
along with this
Okay.
stuff. And this is a little theoretical at this point because the piece of Apple Intelligence that's going to take advantage of this, I think the most recent rumor reporting is that it might not even be till like 18.4, which will probably ship sometime in the spring or like earlier in the new year. So, until I have a device with
Right.
both of these things happening, um, I don't really know how it's going to behave. But yes, app shortcuts will continue to exist outside of Apple Intelligence. And by the way, the SiriKit domains also still exist.
Oh, good grief. Okay.
It's it's a lot, and I think it would be it would be easy to look at this and say, well, this sounds like it's still a mess, and Apple does not have it together. But I think they're laying a lot of plumbing that is going to come together in a way that's really powerful. And the semantic index stuff in particular, what it knows about your context and your identity.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest challenges of building on Alexa and Google Assistant was these silos of context, right? How many episodes have you had on that issue?
Yeah.
Probably plenty. Being able to contribute actions and entities to a system that has an understanding of those things across the ecosystem of apps on your device allows for over time some much more complex utterances that sort of
Yeah.
just
Uh,
sort of say what you want to happen, and
uh, so
it'll do it, right?
again, two thoughts here. The first is yes, and that means so that the core operating system has all this knowledge and knows when you ask a question like, when do I need to leave for the movie? It can call the thing that checks your calendar and sees the movie that you are in, sees what time it starts, and then consult this other one that, knows where you're located, and then yet another one that sees what the transit options are between them. And it has all of this. It can coordinate all those pieces to give you the answer. Very Bixby like.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I almost just answered my next question, which was, and it's doing this in a secure way. so that none of each of those components know why it's being asked that question. All it knows is this limited set of information. So there's no way for, my calendar to leak into my mass transit system somehow. Or
Yeah,
it
totally.
reduces that.
Yeah.
And I guess that's my concern is, if photos is one of the components here, well, okay, are my photos going to start leaking into my contact list equivalent? Where Apple's big on security and privacy, does this really guarantee security and privacy?
My understanding is that orchestration layer, based on the query that comes in, is getting what it needs from the semantic index, which has information from different places across your system, and feeds just those things back into the language model to figure out the result.
It seems like, and again, we're not going to know until we see it and can play with it, but it seems like the semantic index is keeping these components separate from each other so they don't get each other's data, but
Yeah,
that Siri itself does have access to all of it. And that's what the
exactly.
index provides.
Yeah, as a developer, you don't have access to a user semantic index. You have the ability to contribute pieces to that semantic index that are relevant to your app.
And that, of course, leads to the question of, well, okay, how am I going to know who my users are if I can't get information about them? But that's always Apple been saying, yeah, tough. Apple has not wanted to hand out that information ever.
Well, in a lot of cases, they don't want it themselves either.
That's true.
I feel like um, in in hopes of bringing some clarity to this topic, I fear I've introduced more
No,
confusion.
no, not at all. It's a huge scope, and trying to condense it into something small, it's tough. But I think we've kind of captured the essence of it, and we're going to talk about this more, without a doubt, with the understanding that it's a summary at best, and there's a lot to dive into. I think it's been a reasonable. I hope it's been a reasonable summary of what Apple Intelligence is and where it came from, and kind of a little bit about where it's going.
And I think too, it's generally not very Apple like to pre-announce
No, it's
stuff.
not. That's true.
Um, but I think in this instance, the market forces of the AI bonanza sort of held their feet to the fire a little bit, and so a lot of this stuff, particularly the app intents related piece of Apple Intelligence, is still it's still a little theoretical. We don't.
But it's maybe theoretical, but it's also still grounded in stuff that's already been built.
Yes.
It's not being invented out of whole cloth. It's, we have this concept and we're expanding this concept a little. That's at least a little bit more reasonable than saying we're inventing something completely new. That's a little more reassuring. A little.
Yeah. I again the like straight up the app intents framework when it got announced in 2022, it gave me a very clear signal to you know chart a new course. I was like, I see a path to um, you know build the kind of stuff I want to build in the Apple ecosystem.
So, John, this has been amazing. I don't know about anybody else. I am kind of full and trying to process all of this still. As we get the details, there's going to be a lot more to talk about. We're going to actually see how this plays out in reality, how this kind of all fits together. I am sure we'll be talking about this more. Folks can leave comments below, and we will have you back another time on Two Voice Devs.
Two voice devs.
Thanks again, John. It's been fantastic.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Mark too.